News. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for a pop-up conversation with Representative Josh Gottheimer, the Democrat from New York. He is also co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus. We have a ton to get to this morning. We're going to talk news of the day. It's debate night in Atlanta. We're going to talk about bipartisanship and the work that he's been doing and try to make some news along the way. A big thank you to Johnson & Johnson for partnering with us on this event. After my conversation with Mr. Gottheimer, I'm going to be joined by Jane Addams. She is head of office and vice president of U.S. Federal Government Affairs at Johnson & Johnson. We're going to talk about corporate leadership and bipartisanship as well. As always, you can find Punchbowl News on all social media at Punchbowl News. We encourage you to share about this conversation. And with that, I'm going to welcome Mr. Gottheimer to the stage. All right, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you. We have...
Me and my coffee. You want some?
Exactly. Well, we'll share. All right, we have a ton to get to. We already had a feisty conversation backstage, so I know we're going to have a lot of fun this morning. We are going to start, as we always do, with a few news of the day questions.
Sure.
As I alluded to, it is debate night in Atlanta, the first debate for the presidential election. It is going to be a big question out there right now is Joe Biden's stamina and age. What does a win look like for Biden tonight?
Well, the big decision on Capitol Hill is where you're going to watch the debate. That's a very big decision, right? Lots of invites, right? So we're very excited about that. And then after we make that decision, we'll focus on the debate itself. And thank you again for having me, and thanks to Johnson & Johnson for bringing us together. I think a win, frankly, Donald Trump over these last months has set expectations continually so high for himself. And so he better have a big night for himself, as far as I'm concerned, because of just how much he decided to attempt to put down the president. I think the president's going to have a great night. What I think is important is this is going to be, and I think we'll see this pretty quickly this evening, someone who is a common sense, problem solver, democratic leader who is focused on making sure America is strong in the world and strong at home and governs reasonably and smartly and is even versus somebody who we know what the former president likes to do, right? Likes to show lots of chaos.
Right.
And I think there's going to be a very clear difference tonight. And I think people should pay very close attention to the actual substance, right? What's this going to mean for the country? Right? And because I think that's really, there's a very clear choice here. And at the end of the day, all the noise and bluster is one thing, but what is it about? What is the difference between the current president and the former president? And I think if you look at their administrations and look what they fight for, and whether you're talking about choice or child care or how you're going to lead opportunity for all economy versus President Trump and his approach, and I think you're going to see huge differences there, and I think people are going to notice those.
All right. Shifting gears, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be addressing Congress in a few weeks. Many Democrats have said they are not going to attend. You will. What do you say to those who aren't going?
Well, first, can I have your ticket? But second, I really believe this is at the end of the day, this is a relationship that's critical to the United States of America. And I've said to my colleagues, and listen, there'll be some who don't go, and there's some who don't go to all of these. Right. And the answer is, look at this as about the United States and our key ally, Israel. Right. Put aside who the leaders are, focus on the relationship and how this is critical to America's national security. And this relationship has been for decades now historically important for our fight against terror. Israel is the democracy in the region. Right, has stood up for our interests. We see right now Iran and its proxies attacking the United States of America because Iran and the new axis of evil, North Korea, Russia, China, and Iran are focused on one thing: destabilizing democracy in the world, our allies, our approach, and this is really what the fight is about. Right, what we stand for, our values against terrorists. and their values. And I think that's what people should come to listen on. What are we going to do to make sure we protect America's interests, whether it's in the Red Sea, whether it's against Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad? That's what this is really about.
You weighed in against Representative Jamal Bowman in the New York primary race, someone who was outspoken on the issue of Gaza and Israel. George Latmire bested him in that primary. Why take the step to engage against a sitting member of your own party?
Well, I frankly thought that Representative Bowman crossed the line, and not only were his comments in the anti-Semitic zone and have been in this past weekend really jumped over the line, but I think it sends a signal that is not representative of our democratic values. Right? It's not what our party is about. It's the people. So we've got a big election coming up, both to win the House back, and we will, and to win the presidency, and we will. And I think that is a huge distraction, and that's those values are not ours. We should have. There's no place for hate in our rhetoric in our country, and I just think that there was a clear choice there. Bowman
was the first squad member to be ousted. Is there room for those far left members, or in your party, or are you hoping to see more of a centrist, kind of moderate Democrat rise up in the party?
I'm a big believer in a Big Ten party.
Yeah.
There's plenty of room for plenty of voices. I think that's a good thing. And I've had thought that, since I'm involved in democratic politics for a long, long time. I think the key, though, at the end of the day, is making sure we fight for common sense Democrats, common sense values, those willing to work together to get things done for the country. And that's what's most important, right? I mean, I think if you look at our phenomenal leader, Hakeem Jeffries, who's really, we talked to him about being team reasonable, because he leads Team Reasonable, and he's a common sense Democrat. And I think, and he brings people together in a way that I think is historic in putting together our broad Democratic coalition, which appeals to so many people. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure we live up to those values. And I think that's what Leader Jeffries talks about all the time. I think the president talks about of making sure that we work together, we make sure we get stuff done for people, because that's how people judge us on. And this administration, just as a side note for coming attraction tonight, if we actually get to, and the moderators with the mic switching, let people speak enough to make the point of what we've gotten done in these last few years, it's historic, right? If you can talk about whether it's chips in China, helping veterans, common sense gun safety legislation, first time in 30 years, real meaningful gun safety legislation, the infrastructure bill, which we're now seeing the fruits all across the country, changes on the climate to help fight climate, and you look at any night and any storm, what's going on around the country, what we're dealing with in changing the climate, and how critical this administration has been on that front. And look at what Congress has done in a bipartisan way. All of these bills that I just mentioned, bipartisan, right, that we got done working together. And I think that's kind of an important message, is what the country wants us to do.
We are going to talk about bipartisanship in 1 minute, but before...
Sorry, it's like
I know, you're ready. We're ready to go. You're leading the questions, which I appreciate. But I have to ask you, because I talked to my Hill colleagues, John Breslin and Jake Sherman, about what I should be asking you this morning.
I'm so happy you're here and not Jake.
I mean, let's be honest. You won the pick of the draw there. You are a monster fundraiser. $19 million cash on hand in a safe Democratic seat. Do you want to make some news and announce your gubernatorial run?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you're calling it safe. That's very nice of you. I don't ever look at it that way, but I appreciate that.
But the second part of that compound question, do you want to announce your gubernatorial run right here now with Punchbowl News?
Well, I've got a congressional fight that I'm working on right now in November. I'm really focused on that. I'm honored people have talked to me about next year, and I'm certainly looking at that. But what I'm focused on every day is getting stuff done for the people in northern New Jersey. I'll continue to focus on that no matter what I'm doing. And so I appreciate the offer.
Okay. Well, it's open. It stands. So if not today, we'll be checking back in, I am sure. All right. Let's talk bipartisanship. You talked a lot about some of the accomplishments this administration, this past Congress have had. You serve as co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus. I know what that is, but if there's some folks here in person or on the live stream who aren't familiar, Talk about what that group is and kind of what your mission is.
Sure. So we're a group now of 32 Democrats and 32 Republicans. When I first started as co-chair with then Congressman Tom Reed, we were 11 Democrats, 11 Republicans. So we've grown significantly. We get together with one mission, which is to figure out where we agree, not where we disagree, where we can get things done. We've had a ton of accomplishments. We try to work together and talk together and not run outside and leak about every conversation, but actually work together through the minutia of government. Yeah. And I think that's what people want. I know that's what I expect from people that I have voted for in the past. I want them to actually focus on figuring out how to fight for the people that you represent and get things across the finish line. So that's what we do.
So I want to talk about some of the specific wins, but we were talking backstage, and you were saying that you and Congressman Bacon.
Oh, Don Bacon and I, yes. Don, who's one of the vice chairs of the Problem Solvers, who's a phenomenal guy and a great leader. This is not Problem Solvers, and this is beyond Problem Solvers itself. We're going bigger. We are going to reach out to our colleagues and ask them to make a commitment, to sign on to a commitment to recognize the next president and the election, and whoever wins, to actually recognize that winner as the president of the United States, attend the inauguration. Of course, there'll be court. There's always court issues locally, but when the courts are done, recognize the outcome of the court decisions. Susan Collins and I led this legislation, which is now law, called the Electoral Reform Act, last Congress, which fortunately changes a lot of the things that were caused and led to January 6th and some of the problems January 6th. But the bottom line is one of the biggest contributors was that people didn't recognize the outcome of the election and recognize who the president of the United States is. And as you know, former President Trump continues to this day to question the outcome of the last election, right? And there's no room for that in this country. We should recognize the outcome of an election in the greatest democracy the world's ever known. So we're going to ask our colleagues to sign on and to actually make that commitment along with us to recognize the next president. So stay tuned.
All right.
You heard it here first.
There you go. Punchbowl News, breaking news. We always appreciate that. I mean, I think you alluded to this and maybe kind of hit on it a little bit, but I want to dig a little bit deeper, which is, it's hard to find commonality between Republicans and Democrats these days, but it can be even tougher in an election year. How do election considerations change things when it comes to finding partners on the other side of the aisle?
Well, listen, you get to a point every year where it gets to be silly season and things get taken over by the upcoming election. But in a fascinating turn in these last 2 years, which has been full of a lot of controversy on the other side, and as you know, and you have covered it, a lot of the back and forth that's taken up a lot of time out of the calendar. If you look at all of the major accomplishments in this current Congress, right, from the debt ceiling to the foreign aid package to the appropriations packages, they've all been done, interestingly, by Democrats and Republicans having to come together to get it done, right? And in a lot of cases, the Democrats putting the procedural votes, which usually are majority party only votes,
right,
over the finish line. And again, I credit Leader Jeffries with that leadership and working very closely with Speaker Johnson. And I think they have a good relationship, which is, they may disagree plenty on policy areas, but they're willing to work together for the good of the country, and I think that's really the right thing to do. And we've been sitting down a lot. Even if you look at the last, on the foreign aid bill, which we were working on to get it across the finish line. And you lost a lot of people from both sides, and the only way to get it done was by bringing sort of more of the common sense members on both sides to the table.
Yeah, let's talk about that, the security supplemental aid package. You work not only in a bipartisan fashion, but in a bicameral fashion with Senator Markwayne Mullin from Oklahoma.
Yes.
How did that relationship start? I hear you're gym buddies.
Former MMA fighter Markwayne Mullin.
We missed you. Were you in the ring?
So I would not want to be in the ring with him. Let me be very, very clear about that. We work out for 8 years now. There's a group of us who work out every morning in a bipartisan fashion because, of course, my workouts even have to be bipartisan.
On message.
Message. He leads the workouts, and they're insane and intense. If anybody ever wants to work out with us, I encourage it. Just get ready. But we started talking how to make one of the things, and I worked a lot on the immigration package, which And I mean, there were phenomenal leaders in the Senate who were about to get this across the finish line and worked for months getting it done, which would have been a very positive step for our country. And at the last minute, as you know, the former president came in and said, no way, this is not good for my politics, the election, which I think is really pathetic that that's what happened there, but it did, and really unfortunate for the country. That said, many of us were concerned the same thing would happen. So one of the questions was, well, what's the best way to get the foreign aid package, which was critical? I mean, Ukraine, as you know, was in dire straits and needed assistance from the United States of America to fight back against Putin and his dictatorial march across Ukraine. And then aid critical for Israel, aid critical for Taiwan, and for nonprofit security grants. This was a critical piece of legislation, and there was a lot of concern that the same thing would happen, right? That the former president would step in and say, don't do it. And we were able to, through outreach and through, I was working with Mark Wayne and with my leadership and others in the White House, able to figure out how to get this across the finish line and prevent the former president from coming in and trying to block it. And the good news is that reasonableness prevailed, doing the right thing for America's national security prevailed, and our allies, and really glad that got done.
Another issue you've been very passionate on, you're a member of the Intel Committee.
But by the way, you got to be willing to talk to it. But I think the point from that was you got to be willing to talk to each other and work together. You're going to disagree on plenty of things, and this is kind of our whole model in the Problem Solvers Caucus. When we get to 75% of us agreeing, we stand together, right? It means you're going to get 75, 80% of what you want that day, take the win, and then look to tomorrow to get the next win and to get the other 20%. If you insist on all or nothing, you'll get nothing, right? And it's great. You can craft a bill that sits on the shelf. But if you want to actually get legislation across the finish line, part of what we agreed to is we don't campaign against each other. And we make sure we meet and talk to one another and follow practices of civility. I know that sounds nuts in this day and age, but it's actually how you govern and get things done.
It's the little things, right? They matter. How that you're friends, that you see somebody on the floor and you say hi, right? I mean, but that has gone down a lot. You have
to be willing to actually go to the other side when you're on the house and just walk across and say hi. Right. And how you doing? How's your family doing? Because you get to know each other. It's amazing the power of the relationships. And also you learn when you're negotiating a piece of legislation, well, what really matters to that versus trying to guess. They're saying, well, what's your real issue? And what's amazing is that a lot of times you realize, okay, I can work with that. I didn't realize that was your big issue. Could you work with this? And, it's how you got a bipartisan gun safety package done. When people thought, really, you could do bipartisan gun safety legislation? And that's the kind of, whether it's the CHIPS Act or the PACT Act for veterans, all that stuff was done in a bipartisan way. And the same approach with the FAA and FISA and other things that we got done this year. That's the only way it gets done. But you've got to be willing to talk to each other.
I want to hit on a couple of other issues where we have seen some work across the aisle. We were talking, you're a member of Intel. Obviously, one key area we've seen bipartisanship is the effort to ban TikTok in the U.S. Can you talk about some of the work that you've done related to TikTok and trying to safeguard Americans from misinformation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and what's interesting on and we talked about this a little bit, but on the TikTok bill, which I've been working on for this entire Congress and worked on last Congress, because if the prior administration held these views, the current administration held these views, if you see what we've seen, our core set of enemies, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, have been focused on pushing out as much to disrupting and pushing as much disinformation to our country as possible, whether that's anti-American sentiment, whether that's anti-Semitic sentiment, after October 7th, anything to disrupt, right? Because if you look at what the leadership in China has said, and it's been declassified, their goals have been to use spheres of influence to disrupt our democracy because they believe that our best days are behind us, that democracy can't work anymore, right? So the best way to do that is to foment anger and division in our country, to get us to tear each other apart. If we're fighting against each other and can't pass legislation, can't agree on things, well, they get to advance and we're stuck.
Right.
And that's what they fundamentally believe. So they're doing everything they can, whether it's through media, whether it's through sports, gaming, academia, and of course all social media and online to disrupt. And TikTok, which is can be controlled by the government, their parent company ByteDance, controlled by the government of China, is doing exactly that, being able to have the ability to mess with the algorithms. If you download it on your phone, you give them full access to your phone. 170 million Americans use TikTok. If you're under the age of 30, it's your #1 news source. Literally, it's what you believe. I mean, and Punchbowl. But
right up there.
But it's your #1 news source.
Yeah.
And so, would we hand over the keys to our national networks on news to our #1 enemy? It makes no sense. But that's exactly what we're doing right now.
That moved very fast. It's not typical, right? Oftentimes things, when you mention some of the key legislative accomplishments that have been across the aisle, I mean, this sometimes are decades in the making. Multi-year engagements, the child tax credit, something that Republicans and Democrats have historically worked fairly closely together on. More recently, there's been a lot more division on it. Where does that effort stand? It obviously passed the House and kind of went to die in the Senate.
I mean, a bunch of us were just talking about this yesterday. Child tax credit, critically important, right? We know, so if you're in Jersey, the greatest state in the country, the child care costs are the second highest in the country, right? It's incredibly expensive. And we want people to be able to go to work who want to go to work. And if you can't afford, I hear from parents all the time, I just heard the other night from a mom who said to me, like, I'm having to cut back all my hours. I can't afford the child care costs. And we've got to, the child tax credit is so critical. And by the way, Democrats and Republicans hugely agree on this issue, right? Mm-hmm. Anything about affordability overall, and affordability for taking care of your kid, for food for your kids, and for all children. And so it's very frustrating because we got it done in the House in a bipartisan way. Not easy, right, to get people to, as you point out, to agree on things. We got it done. And the Senate is having their skirmishes. And I think it's ridiculous. I'm hoping that they put it up for a vote, and because I think it's a hard thing to vote against this package, which includes good R&D incentives and encouraging that for our country, and will help our economy, and also, of course, help families with child costs.
All right, we're going to do a last question here because we are quickly running out of time. We've talked a lot about some of the accomplishments, the challenges in an election year, but I want you to project forward, thinking post-election here. Where do you see the Problem Solvers Caucus playing its biggest role? Is it government funding? Is it looking at the 2025 tax bill?
So I think this year, this Congress, we're quickly running out of steam in terms of big stuff we're going to do. I think the tax bill is going to be a huge issue. And I really see the Problem Solvers Caucus coming together around that, around all issues related to affordability, and the tax bill is critical to that, right? I mean, I'm a guy who believes we need to bring back the state and local tax deduction, full deduction. That's going to be a really interesting issue because you've got a lot of Democrats and Republicans from blue states now that care a lot about salt, right? You think about
costs a lot of money though, so that's going to be a big challenge.
Yeah, although it would go back to the way it used to be. So people want to some of the red states will try to rob that cash again for themselves. So we'll see. I think there's going to be huge debate about priorities for our country, like childcare, right? In that debate, but that is going to be the first big fight. I think on crypto, there's going to be a lot of. We're heading to a point on crypto where you saw good movement in the House on market structure, in our committee, on the Financial Services Committee, on stablecoins. I think we've got to get rules of the road set up there. Right, it is a huge opportunity for our economy, but we've got to move on it. Right, just like we're moving maybe on privacy. I think we got to see maybe. But I think the crypto stuff, we don't have time to delay there. We've got to get that done. I could see that being a big part. And I think the foreign policy stuff will continue to be front and center and a big issue. So there's a lot in front of us coming up. We've got a farm bill that we're going to have to actually get done across the finish line. So there's a lot of hunger issues related to that. So there's a lot to get done. But tonight is going to be a key part in making sure that President Biden wins. All right, we are going to leave it there, sir. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you. All right, we'll let you go that way. Thanks, guys. All right, now I'm going to welcome Jane Addams to the stage. She is Vice President of U.S. Federal Government Affairs and Head of Office for Johnson & Johnson. We are going to continue the conversation related to bipartisanship. Jane, come on up.
Thanks, Hannah.
Yes, great. Thanks. All right. Well, we went through a lot of topics there.
That was great.
Hitting on all of the issues and the importance of bipartisanship, clearly a main centerpiece of Congressman Gottheimer's approach to policy, approach to deal making. I would love to kind of take it from your vantage point. Why is it important to have Republicans and Democrats work together?
Yeah, critically important, and I really appreciate the congressman's comments because we are headquartered in the great state of New Jersey. I want to do a shout out to my colleagues who are here today and say thank you for hosting this really timely and critical conversation. Bipartisanship for a company like Johnson & Johnson, it's not really about Republicans and Democrats. It's about the fact that we adhere to priorities, principles, our credo, which I'll talk about in a moment, that actually transcends parties, transcends majorities, transcends timing, conventions, all of that. We are a company that's been around for almost 140 years. And so we can't be swayed by the kind of the uncertainty of what's going to happen tomorrow. It's about companies thrive when there's predictability, when there's transparency, when there's stability. And so that's what we look for, and that's the relationships that we build across the aisle, because you never know, you better than anyone, who may be in power, your power matrix, very good, who's up, who's down. Yeah. Companies and organizations who are longstanding with a history of bipartisanship must see not just today, but tomorrow.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. I mean, right now we've really been in a period where it's your majorities are so slim anyway, right? And so you're kind of looking at both houses could potentially switch power, which is very unusual. But talk about that corporate leadership, because I think it's, a really interesting vantage point for us to kind of look at. We focus so intently on the Capitol and what lawmakers are doing, but corporate America has a role to play as well.
Yeah, and it's changing, in fact, at least from the perceptions in Washington. And I think, we always talk about how our priorities, our credo, our issues will transcend any, again, political environment. And that actually earns us the right to disagree. And that's been something that we have believed at J&J, forever, that if we make sure that we are taking a seat at the table when invited and bring real solutions, it doesn't matter the political dynamic. We will know how to navigate that because we stay committed to our Johnson & Johnson credo, again, to our priorities that will, again, be longstanding. They're historic. And so I think that's how we prove leadership. We also have priorities that maintain, again, throughout different administrations, different majorities, different congressional cycles. And it's not just the products that we research and manufacture. It's also what we do for the healthcare ecosystem. And, our credo, in fact, that was written in 1943 by Robert Wood Johnson, one of the original children of our founders, again, headquartered in New Brunswick, New Jersey. We've never left in 138 years. Great state of New Jersey, like Congressman Gottheimer. It says that if we put patients and healthcare professionals and people who use our products first, and then we look at our employees, because we're nothing without our great people, and then we look at our communities and how we actually lead within the community, irrespective of political parties. Our shareholders, because we are a publicly traded, successful, large company, will be taken care of. And so that's what guides us when we are looking at political divisiveness in Washington, in the states, and beyond.
Let's talk about health equity, because that's one of the big areas where Johnson & Johnson has long been a leader. How do you approach that as an issue, as a long-term, right? A lot of what you're talking about is that this isn't just the political wins of the day, but, you've been around for more than 140 years. You want to be around probably 140 plus more years. Talk about that issue a little bit for us.
So health equity is something that J&J has been committed to long before I think it was either trendy or maybe more noticeable, because we've always adhered to looking at what is equitable access to innovation, to the technologies, to the medicines that we provide, that we've researched. We spend more in research and development than any other company, even outside of the healthcare sector, because we understand that's our lifeblood, is innovation. But I think when we're looking at health equity, it's racial, it's ethnic, it's gender, it's generational, it's demographic. When we talk about health equity, it's how we can engage in, invest in, and provide accessible treatment to innovations for the patients we serve. We serve billions of people all over the planet. It's not just here in the United States. Obviously, we're a large global company. And that has really driven our long-standing historic commitment to health equity, from our investments with healthcare professionals here in the U.S., but also around the globe in developing communities here in the United States. We look at how we can help to, again, invest and create more equitable access. That's what our approach to health equity is, and it is broad-based and it is long-standing, and I think it's what differentiates J&J from any other healthcare company in the world.
Let's dig a little bit deeper there, because I was reading this morning in preparation for this conversation around the support of the Lorna Breen Healthcare Provider Protection Act, kind of going into kind of a layer deeper than what you were just talking about.
Thank you for bringing up this incredible effort, and I really have to give my colleague Kelly Waters, wherever she is, out in the audience, a lot of credit for this. Back when COVID started, as you may remember, New York City was the epicenter. And there was an emergency room physician, Dr. Lorna Breen, at Columbia Presbyterian, who at the end of April, so we knew about COVID, kind of in mid-March, there was so much focus on, the intensity of COVID, the healthcare professionals. She ended up very sadly taking her own life because, as we learned from her family, who soon reached out to us, the Laura Breen Heroes Foundation, said she was afraid that her burnout and asking for help would threaten her license and her credibility. And so the very people who were tasked with saving our lives during the pandemic were taking their own. And so what we learned was it had nothing to do with the J&J product. It had nothing to do with branding. There was no J&J involved. A team of colleagues, some of whom are here in the room, actually recognized this is something that, again, our credo says we must do. And we must do for healthcare professionals and ultimately for patients. And so that began an effort in partnership with the foundation to develop the Lorna Breen, Dr. Lorna Breen Healthcare Provider Protection Act, which is now up for reauthorization to continue the funding for those resources and also look at the licensure and try to remove the stigma of the burnout of healthcare professionals who's, again, are afraid and threatened that if they ask for help, and then the only alternative seems to be to take their own lives in situations similar to our commitment on veterans and veteran suicide. And so I think this is one of the greatest efforts and credo-based activities that we've ever partnered on, because it's not about a product. It's not about a service. It's not even about Johnson & Johnson. We're not even in the mix other than behind the scenes to do something that we know is critical for our healthcare providers in this country.
We are going to quickly run out of time, but definitely an opportunity for leadership, right? And to your point of it, it's not just about leading necessarily with the brand, but in terms of what's right, and doing the right thing. You have a history of supporting the nursing community kind of broadly. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So you've heard we care a lot about the health workforce because, again, we are with patients every day, but really who's kind of directing the traffic. And we tend to think nurses have the ones, not that we don't love our physicians and other healthcare professionals, we do, but nurses have the touch. Nurses have the human touch. They are by our bedsides 24/7. They are the ones who are dealing with the family. They are dealing with joyful situations and tragedy. And so our commitment to nurses is not just to provide and help to support the resources that are needed to be an effective nurse, to avoid the burnout, but I think also to recognize that nursing goes beyond the medical, kind of the medical environment that we think of healthcare professionals. Nurses are our partners. They are our husbands and wives and kids and grandparents and friends and neighbors. And we feel that nurses help to create what J&J believes is the personal touch that all patients need.
All right, we are quickly running out of time, but one of the things I often ask in these conversations, because I think it's a real opportunity for corporate leaders we have a lot of staff here, we have people watching on the live stream, advocates. What's the one takeaway you want them to take from a conversation on bipartisanship, on corporate leadership, and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, no, thanks. And I think, again, the congressman and you teed this up so beautifully. it's about kind of collective common sense. And it's about keeping an eye on the priorities that are best for us, the patients we serve. And again, that will transcend the different political majorities and parties, and keeping our eye on what matters. And in our case, it's about solving healthcare problems and delivering cures and treatments to patients all over the globe.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Jane.
Thank you,
really
Anna.
appreciate it. A big thank you to Johnson & Johnson for partnering with us for making this conversation possible, and to Mr. Gottheimer and his team for being willing to come on stage on a busy day. Thanks to all of you for joining us. We have more events in July. You can go to our events hub at punchbowl.news. Have a great day and stay safe, everybody.